Hi, Matt.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
I'm okay. Let me introduce us. I am Robert Wright, and we are on The Wright Show. And you are Matthew Hudson. You're the author of...
The 7 Laws of Magical Thinking.
Very good.
Irrational beliefs keep us happy, healthy, and sane.
You read that very well. It was almost as if you were familiar with the book.
Yeah, it looks pretty familiar. I think I've seen it somewhere before.
Now, what is the deal with a fan blowing the spots off the Dalmatian?
Oh, yeah. Well, in my research, I uncovered that the spots on Dalmatians are actually all in your head.
Oh, they're not there.
No, they're all imaginary, and we didn't want to bury the lead on that one.
No, you want to get that right up front.
Yeah.
Because that's the big pull to buy the book. Yeah. So let's talk a little about this. First of all, you're a journalist. You've written for Wired, New York Times Magazine. You used to be an editor at Psychology Today, right?
Yes.
And the book, the thesis is kind of that even people who don't think of themselves as religious, right, kind of think in some of the same ways that religious people think. That there are kind of cognitive styles, ways of thinking that are more deeply embedded in human nature broadly than your average atheist might think.
Yeah. So I'm a sort of a good test case on this. I'm a complete skeptic. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in life after death. But I still see some of these tendencies and some of these behaviors in myself. Like I still knock on wood. If I'm having a bad day, I still feel like the universe is conspiring against me. That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there are these sort of basic habits of mind.
But you don't actually believe that knocking on wood helps, and you don't actually believe the universe is conspiring against you.
Right. I recognize that it's just an illusion, and knocking on wood is not going to have some causal effect on the world around me. That is just sort of to put my mind at ease, and these are just illusions, but I still notice them in myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing I want to talk about as we go through your 7 laws, to what extent we're talking about cognition as traditionally conceived, and to what extent we're talking about kind of affect, the way people feel. They're intertwined very closely in general in life, and that comes into play, I think, with some of your laws. So it's conveniently organized by chapter. We can just go straight through the book, talk about the 7 laws quickly, and then talk about what it all means.
Sure.
So the first chapter is Objects Carry Essences, Cooties, Contagion, and Historicity. And by historicity, you mean something other than what's generally meant by that word, I think. So give us an example of what you mean there.
Okay, so people tend to value family heirlooms or celebrity memorabilia, these objects that have a particular history or were owned or touched by someone else. And they sense that these objects carry some sort of non-physical essence to them. So if someone offered you a brand new version of one of these things, it wouldn't feel the same to you. Or even if someone had a machine that could duplicate this item atom by atom, you would still feel like there was something to the original that wasn't duplicated.
Okay, so let's say that I have something that belonged to my father, which I do. He was in the military. I have some military memorabilia. I have his medals, medals that he won. And you're saying that when it's not the physical look of the thing. All these medals look alike.
Yeah.
You're saying if somebody said, will you swap me your father's medals for these medals that were won by my father, I would say no, even though they would look exactly the same. And you're saying that is a kind of irrational belief. But is it really a belief? I mean, I don't believe, I mean, that's what I mean when I say, are we talking about cognition or affect? I don't really believe that there's an aura clinging to them. But there's something about the knowledge that it's my father's that makes me feel a certain way.
Yeah. So that's one of the things I try to clear up early in the book, in the introduction. I explain that there are many different layers to belief. So the way I use the word belief, I'm talking about not just explicit things that you would put down in writing, but also biases or intuitions or behavioral tendencies.
Okay. Yeah, we had Paul Bloom on some time ago, his book, How Pleasure Works, and he gets into this whole essence business. I noticed you got a nice Paul Bloom blurb. Got some nice blurbs here. Jonathan Haidt, Thacker Keltner. They've all been on Blogging Heads, and they're all luminaries.
Yeah, it felt good to have that sort of feedback from people that I really respect.
Yeah, because you and I are mere journalists, and these are actual thinkers.
Yeah,
they think thoughts.
They've done the real stuff. I'm just, riding on their coattails.
Yeah. The living. So, okay. I mean, anything else you want to say about this kind of essence business? I mean, we'll talk about the kind of the suspected natural origins of it. Why are we like this? I mean, it also, cooties is in the subtitle of this chapter, right? It also has to do with this idea that these essences can be transmitted from one thing to another, right?
Through contact. So one idea is that this idea of magical contagion is based on a heuristic or a sort of mental rule of thumb that properties are transmitted through contact. And so whether this is wired into us at birth or whether we learn it quickly, we understand that if something dirty touches something else, then it can make the other thing dirty. If something hot touches something else, it can make the other thing hot. So just in general, we have this rule of thumb that properties are transmitted through touch. And so it's possible that we apply this so broadly that we think even about subjective properties or aspects of people's personalities or things like evil or intelligence. We think that those things might be able to be transmitted through contact. So that's just one hypothesis.
There are all kinds of taboos in kind of, small-scale traditional societies about what you can touch and what you shouldn't touch. And, I mean, you can imagine this belief having arisen by virtue of its actual utility, because when you're talking about things like diseases, they really do spread in this seemingly invisible way. Yeah. And so if you had this aversion to things, rotten flesh or just somebody who's really sick, and, the idea that certain kinds of bad things can be transmitted invisibly could be a useful, could be built into us by natural selection.
Yeah, it would make sense to pay attention to the provenance of the things around you, particularly food, to make sure that if someone sick touches something, then you wouldn't want to touch that because that person's sickness could be transmitted through it. So even before we had a theory about germs, we possibly had this sort of intuition that there's something invisible that could directly harm us, that could be transmitted through touch.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, your second law is that symbols have power, in this chapter I learned something I had no idea, but in Yankee Stadium, there is, I gather, so in the current, wait, Yankee Stadium is this the one that got?
The brand new one.
This is the brand new one. So, encased in cement is a jersey, I guess the kind you would buy at a store, a David Ortiz jersey.
Yeah.
And it's there for superstitious reasons, not put there by the Yankee ownership, as we will learn, but explain why that is there.
Yeah, well, it's not there anymore.
Oh, it's not. It got moved.
So a construction worker who lives in Queens, he's a Red Sox fan. But he was invited to work on the new Yankee Stadium, and he kept turning the job down until one day he got an idea. He decided he could curse the stadium. So he went there one day. He brought a David Ortiz jersey with him. He buried it in wet cement, took photos of it, and then worked the rest of the day and left the job site. And then about a year later, the team got wind of this. And some people who had seen it being buried told them where it was. And so they jackhammered it out of several feet of concrete and located it. And then the next day they had a big ceremony where they invited media and executives pulled this jersey out of out of the ground and held it high. So it was almost this tribal ceremonial voodoo kind of ritual.
Yeah, it's more interesting than the fact that the guy put it there in the first place, that the organization considered it imperative to get it out of there.
Yeah, they took it that seriously.
And the backstory has to do with the so-called curse of the Bambino, where it was thought that the reason the Boston Red Sox never won the World Series was because they traded Babe Ruth to the Yankees. And similarly, David Ortiz is a guy that the Yankees had a chance to have play for them. They let him go to Boston, and so there was thought to be some kind of symmetry here.
Yeah. And then he also helped break the curse of the Bambino.
He did, in fact. Yeah, the Red Sox finally, with him on the team, won a World Series. So what are some other examples of how all of us might engage in behavior like that's comparable to this?
Let's see. Well, there's one study where people were asked to cut up a photograph of a cherished childhood item, and they started sweating when they were asked to cut up this photograph. So we treat pictures of things as if they have some direct connection to what they represent. And so if someone asked you to tear up a photo of your mom, for instance, then you probably, you might do it, but you'd feel a little bit weird about it. Language is also another type of symbol. So the book is all about symbols, whether they're acts or pictures or words or numbers. And they can be directly, they can be iconic, they can be sort of arbitrarily symbolic. So a word would be something that is sort of arbitrary, but it's come to represent something else. And so people fear saying particular words, or in Harry Potter, they talk about he who shall not be named, Lord Voldemort. Or people talk the same way about their exes, someone I don't want to name.
Yeah, the thing about tearing up a picture of your mother is interesting because, again, it's not like, on the one hand, it's not like you have the belief that some ill will befall her necessarily if you tear it up. But on the other hand, if somebody said, why are you unable to tear it up? What belief undergirds your reluctance to tear it up? You'd kind of be at a loss. You'd kind of like, well, it's like, and you'd kind of try to articulate something, and it would be hard.
Yeah. So I think this idea of a connection between the symbol and the thing that it represents is, it might be a sort of a post hoc justification for your anxiety. So part of you realizes it's just a picture, it's not the real thing, but then another part of you feels some anxiety as if the picture is the real thing and you're harming the real thing. And so then you have this dissonance, and you try to resolve this dissonance by suspecting that, maybe harming this thing that is not the real thing does somehow harm the real thing through some magical connection.
And so people had trouble tearing up pictures even of just their possessions?
Yeah. So this study was, people brought in like toys that they had in childhood, and they were photographed. And some of the photos were even out of focus and blurry, so it didn't even look like the object. But people still made the connection between the photo and the object, and they still...
that might be harder than things I own now, actually, come to think of it. Like childhood possessions come to have a power with the passage of time, because they represent this long-lost era when everything is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, hopefully things were wonderful.
Yeah, that varies by person, but often we're remembering them as more wonderful than they were, but seems good. Okay, so law number 3 is actions have distant consequences. What does that mean?
So this is all about superstitious rituals. They're not necessarily symbolic, like the law of similarity. Just any kind of act that you think brings you good luck or bad luck, like knocking on wood, crossing fingers, wearing a lucky hat. And so through illusory correlation, you see a connection between some behavior and then some outcome, and you think that maybe this behavior caused the outcome. So if you wear a hat and then something good happens, you think maybe the hat caused the outcome.
Mm-hmm. Now, are there a lot of people who don't? I mean, there are people who do that and really kind of feel. There are people who do it and explicitly believe it,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's people who do it and kind of feel it. You know, they might not admit to believing it, and yet they do it. But aren't there a lot of people who don't do that kind of stuff? I don't. I mean, some of these laws I do kind of relate to, but that one, I don't think I do superstitious stuff per se.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any stats on, like, how many people are effectively superstitious or anything?
It's a tough thing to measure exactly. I think it shades into non-magical rituals or habits. So if you have a particular routine that you use in order to get ready in the morning, maybe you put on your right shoe first, that sort of thing, or you brush your teeth a certain way. So that's just sort of a way that you do things every day. And then let's say you do things differently one day, and then you have a really crappy day.
Mm-hmm.
Part of you might start to wonder if, doing things differently had that effect. So that's the kind of thing that it's hard to really measure and say, yes, that's definitely a magical belief. But it's easy to see how certain habits can shade into superstition.
See, what I have is, because I was brought up religiously, I think I still, if things go bad, I have this algorithm where I think it's because of something I did that was morally wrong.
Yeah.
I don't mean I wind up believing that, but it's kind of a reflexive suspicion. So to the extent that I'm involved in this kind of thinking, it's not superstition in the pure sense. Superstition in the pure sense is like there's no logical connection, right, between why, walking under a ladder, actually there is. Something could fall on you. But anyway, your average, like not stepping on the third baseline, a classic baseball player superstition. They walk on the field and they don't step on the third baseline. It doesn't make any sense. No logical connection between that and your performance. Whereas, if you were brought up believing that there's a God, then it makes sense that you do something bad, morally bad, that God would disapprove of, and bad things happen, right? Yeah. So is that considered superstition?
Well, I think the suspicion that if you do something morally bad and then something bad happens to you, that's something I discuss in chapter 7, talking about destiny, and I cover belief in karma also. So we could wait until 7 to talk about that, or we could go into it now.
Let's hold off on that until 7. But is your sense that most people are at least a little superstitious in the pure sense?
Yeah. Most people will explicitly say that they do have certain superstitions. And then even among the minority who claim that they don't have anything, I think that they probably, some part of them does feel like there's some sort of connection between things that they do and good or bad luck.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any regular superstitious behaviors?
The most obvious thing I think would be knocking on wood.
Yeah, but people do that as a joke, right? I mean, people, that's a way of saying, I hope. I hope this will happen. It may not, I hope. Yeah. I hope it'll happen. That's to me, that's what knocking on wood means.
Yeah. I think there's also some social element to that. Saying if you're counting your blessings, you do that just to acknowledge that you realize that you are fortunate, and so other people won't, give you the evil eye, so to speak.
Yeah, and in a way, that could tie into a kind of religious belief in the sense that hubris would be punished. That if you take good fortune for granted, God will punish you, and so it's a way of signifying your humility.
Yeah. So in this chapter, I also talk about tempting fate.
Right.
So there are a couple big ways to supposedly tempt fate. One is showing hubris, and taking success for granted. So stating, okay, this looks like it's going to be a no-hitter. And there's a phrase, the best way to the way to make God laugh in your face is to tell him your plans. And so if you sort of assume that things are going to go the way that you planned, then, everything's going to go to hell.
Right. Now, come to think of that as something I do is kind of ritually profess low expectations.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's superstitious or just a little trick I play that lowers my own expectations enough that I'll probably be pleasantly surprised, you know?
Yeah.
But I think it has a kind of a superstitious. I think that there is actually, come to think of it, hovering in there the sense that I'll be punished if I profess confidence.
Yeah.
Okay, so law number 4 is the mind knows no bounds.
Yeah. So this covers mind over matter and also ESP.
Now, it also covers prayer, right?
Prayer, I would separate prayer and that's using God as a mediator, that you're communicating through some.
Okay, but you've got this example where the Apollo 13 example in this chapter, right? Where Apollo 13 was having a crisis, and they said let's all pray for Apollo 13. Of course, there was also the sense that just people were thinking of them and wishing them well, so the two were intertwined.
Yeah, definitely intertwined.
Okay.
So I'm suggesting that even atheists or people who are not praying, just people who are focusing on or picturing the success of Apollo 13, when they eventually did come back safely, the people might have felt some responsibility for that, based on the research showing that if you think about something and then it happens, you feel a little bit responsible for it.
Mm-hmm. Is this part of the movie, by the way? I don't recall. Have you seen Apollo 13?
I have. I don't remember if they talk about the prayer around the world, that sort of thing.
It was more about their exploits, I think, in saving the day. Okay, so this includes it includes ESP. It includes doesn't include karma, what you treat elsewhere. Are there other examples of this kind of ordinary examples of the mind knows no bounds?
Well, so the two big things are your thoughts being sent out into the world, psychokinesis, and then ideas being directly communicated into your mind through ESP. And then I also talk a little bit about awe and the sense of transcendence and the kind of feeling at one with the universe, which I think is not in itself a type of magical belief, but it's this sort of state in which it's easy to have kind of superstitious cognitions where you're thinking that, okay, everything is one, or the universe loves me, or I'm connected to everyone in the world, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Sort of your ego dissolves a little bit when you're in the state of awe.
Right. It's like a mystical experience, kind of.
Yeah.
And you talk a little about quantum mysticism in this chapter, I think. The Tao of Physics and the Dancing Wu-Li Masters and those books from like the 70s, I guess, mainly. Or that's when it started, at least. Right?
Yeah, and more recently, The Secret with the Law of Attraction.
Yeah, that's not physics-based. I mean, that's not a quantum physics thing, right? I haven't looked into it. That's just... do they claim any kind of scientific authority for that?
Yeah, there are some mentions of science in there where they're trying to ground their mystical beliefs in physics.
Okay.
Yeah.
Law number 5 is the soul lives on.
Yeah. So this is all about our dualism and our belief in souls and the afterlife and ghosts, in the sense that your consciousness can survive even without its neural substrate, even without the brain that gives rise to it.
And that's usually associated with religious belief, right? I mean, how many people have no religious belief whatsoever and yet believe that?
It's another thing that's tough to get to measure through surveys to say do you believe this or that, because a lot of these things they're not explicit beliefs, or they're sort of things that cognitive biases you don't even realize that you have. So, for instance, Jesse Barian has studied this a lot,
right?
And he talks about how you can't picture what happens after you die. If you try to imagine what it's like to be dead, you're still imagining something, whatever it is. So you can't fully simulate non-existence, basically. And so he asked some subjects to imagine a guy who died in a car accident, and then he asked the subjects questions about various mental states that the guy had. And there's one subject he quoted who, the guy said that he was an atheist, and he said that this fictional subject, this fictional character who died in the car crash, that this character felt silly because of course there was no afterlife, and he realizes that now. As if you die and then you say, "Oh, okay, I'm dead," and there's no afterlife. Mm-hmm. So it's the sort of thing that the subject didn't even realize that he was thinking about consciousness continuing after death.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever seriously entertain the possibility of life after death?
No, I don't. But then they also talk about this thing called the symbolic immortality, which we put effort into building up our legacies as if we can live on through.
Right. Now, I was going to ask you, what is so kind of magical or superstitious about the idea of legacy? I mean, when I think of legacy, I don't think of anything magical about it. I mean, I guess I would say, how is wanting to have a robust legacy different from wanting to do good while you're alive? You'd like to, at the end of a day, say, well, I did some good today. And then you'd like to, when you die, think, well, the good consequences of any good things I do will live on in the form of maybe a student I taught or something like that. How are those two things? Are you saying they're both magical thinking, or they're different and one is and one isn't, or what?
Well, if you're thinking about how you are going to positively affect other people after you die, it's not so different from thinking about how you're going to positively affect people before you die. But if you're thinking about how you yourself will benefit from having a legacy after you die, that I think is magical thinking, because of course you won't be around to benefit from
but
that.
We agree on that after you die, not be alive.
So people,
right, but I don't think that belief is implied in wanting a legacy, right? I mean, I guess, and I mean, for that matter, when at the end of the day I think, oh, I did some good things, well, I'm not directly benefiting from the things themselves. Now, I am enjoying the thought of having done them, and I guess you're saying, well, that's going to end when you die, so you shouldn't care. You won't be able to get gratification out of the good deeds, so you shouldn't. So it's irrational to care?
Well, the interesting research in this area is called terror management theory. So basically, thinking about your legacy reduces fear of death. So I think that's the most suggestive type of finding. So it's as if it provides some sort of immortality. Of course, it's not really. I can't be sure whether it reduces fear of death by providing a sense of immortality, or whether it just, through some other mechanism, it reduces fear of death.
Well, you're saying fear of death is rational, so if there's anything that leads you to not fear it, that must be a form of irrationalism?
I think it's pretty rational to fear death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess, I mean, it's not going to be unpleasant being dead.
And there are cases where you could do a cost-benefit analysis and say, okay, the world would be better off if I'm dead. So I guess in that case, it would be irrational to fear death. But
well, no. I mean, in general, you've described rationalism in terms of self-interest, right? I mean, that seems to be your basic framework, is that it's rational to want good things to happen to you.
I would count positive benefits, wanting positive benefits for other people as part of part of rationality. But that's more, preference, I guess. Some people prefer to make other people happy. Some people don't. So it's tough to really apply rationality to prosociality or caring for others.
Yeah. I mean, there are people that argue that it's actually irrational and arbitrary to identify with your own welfare over any others, and that that's a form of bias, and that you're more enlightened if you treat all people equally. But this is not a treatise on moral philosophy, so we'll move on to the law of magical thinking number. Oh wait, we already did 5. The soul lives on. Number 6. The world is alive. This is kind of about animism, right?
Yeah, and anthropomorphism, and treating objects around you as if they have personalities and consciousness. So, for instance, yelling at your laptop when it crashes, or at your car when it breaks down, or treating an animal as if it's a full human companion.
Yeah, see, I was going to ask you, those seem to me 2 very different things. I mean, you're right that I get mad at my computer, and I assume that's because we are designed to get mad at things. Well, we're designed to get mad at humans. Computers are kind of like humans, so they elicit that response. I mean, it seems like they're messing with us the way a human could mess with us. And so that's kind of crazy. Now, but when you talk about a dog or something, I guess there are a couple of different things. I mean, one is getting mad at a dog and punishing it can actually alter its behavior, unlike getting mad at a computer. The other thing is to treat a dog as if it's like significant the way a human is, can feel pleasure or pain, and be concerned about it. That's very different from your interaction with a computer, right?
Yeah, it makes sense to think that dogs have rudimentary consciousness, that they have pleasure and pain. But I don't think that they have the full self-consciousness that humans do. I don't think they have the complex personalities and theory of mind that humans do. So it's not just thinking of something as alive or conscious. It's magical thinking would be the over-attribution of human-like qualities or of consciousness to an object, or not just an object, but a living being. So I think it's possible even to anthropomorphize a human, which seems paradoxical.
Sure does.
Let's say you have a fetus or someone who is severely brain damaged. I wouldn't call them full people in the sense that they don't have the full level of intentionality and pleasure and pain, even. Although that's debatable. But I don't think they have the full capacities of you or me. But then to treat them as if they do, that is anthropomorphism.
Yeah, of course, you could say the same thing about a 6-week-old baby, probably, to some extent. Although, again, I mean, to treat something as just capable of pleasure or pain, to be concerned about the welfare of something that can feel pleasure or pain seems to me not in any sense irrational or necessarily anthropomorphic. I mean, when you start talking to a 6-week-old as if it understands what you're saying, or a dog, and some people do. I mean, I talk to my dogs, but I don't believe that they understand me. I think my wife sometimes thinks that they understand her, but I won't get into that. I don't know. It's complicated.
And then the question of moral rights is a completely separate issue. You can look at a being, a baby, and say, well, this baby is pretty stupid, but I'm still going to treat it as a full person. So that's sort of a separate moral or philosophical issue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other things we treat as people or alive? I mean, the term animism comes from the study of so-called primitive religion. I mean, long ago, in the 19th century, people emphasized. In fact, the theory was that religion had begun in a kind of animism. The idea that the wind is a living thing. Attributing kind of conscious life to various things that now we would just consider kind of artifacts of the way nature works.
Mm.
Right.
So yeah, there are religions or belief systems that are based upon this tendency to treat the world as alive. My favorite quote about anthropomorphism or sort of animistic thinking is by the anthropologist Stuart Guthrie, who says that it is better to mistake a boulder for a bear than to mistake a bear for a boulder. So that's where we get that the error management theory, and it's certain assumptions or certain biases are positive because the damage of making an error in one direction is worse than making an error in another direction.
Right. The idea there is that part of our inclination toward religious belief arises out of natural selection having inculcated in us this bias toward false positives.
Yeah.
Because you're better off thinking, oh, is that a lion? And then turning out to be wrong and thinking, who cares? And so that would explain things like getting the sense of a presence, like I think there's something behind me, which in turn can have a religious manifestation, a sense of kind of God's presence. The theory goes.
Yeah.
Is he the one who wrote the book Faces in the Clouds?
Yeah.
Okay, 6. No, we did 6. Oh, we're approaching the culminating law of magical thinking. Everything happens for a reason. Okay, tell us about this.
So this is all about destiny and fate and karma, feeling like certain things were meant to happen, as if the universe were intentionally directing events around us, and as if it cared about us.
Or for religious people, as if God out there was. But
yeah. It could, so that you could attribute this intentionality to a human-like God in the sky who's watching over you, or just sort of a more nebulous kind of force that guides the events around us.
And do you find that people who would not say they're religious, don't believe in a God, very often are really thinking this way?
I think so, because it's sort of like the bias in anthropomorphism. If you see a rustle in the bushes, you could see it as wind or the effects of an animal. So it's not just seeing the direct boulder or bear, but seeing the effects of a possible agent, whether it's a human or an animal or some sort of supernatural agent. So again, we're biased to see events as intentionally caused.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, for some people, I guess this is psychologically adaptive, right? I mean, you often, certainly religious people, often when something bad happens, convince themselves that it's God's way of leading them towards some path or something. And now, I don't know if the secular version of this has the same consoling effect, but is that your sense?
Yeah, so I guess my secular version of this is if something bad happens, then this is sort of an existential approach. I try to see nothing as inherently good or bad. Things just happen, and then whatever meaning there is created by us. So I try to interpret an event as a positive event. So then it's kind of just one more step to say that this positive event was intended to be positive by the universe, and that the positivity of this event is inherent in the event. But either way, whether you're religiously saying that this event was meant to be as a message or in order to change my life in a certain way, or whether you're putting your own spin on it and not consciously attributing it to God, it is a positive coping mechanism. So trying to find benefits in things. It helps post-traumatic growth, helps coping.
And this is your belief more generally, right? That in general, these laws of these tendencies toward magical thinking, as you characterize them, are by and large good. I
wouldn't go so far as to say that they are, on average, good or bad. To me, the surprising thing was just that there are sometimes benefits to these illusions. Because you kind of, I had the assumption that illusions and delusions are bad and you should have an accurate picture of reality.
Mm-hmm.
But there's such a thing as positive illusions, just as there are white lies. And so finding certain benefits to magical thinking and to, not having a clear picture of reality. So I try to highlight some of those.
And I think the research shows that people who have a more realistic appraisal of reality are actually less happy than people who don't.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of research on depressive realism, suggesting that people who are clinically depressed actually have a more accurate view of the amount of control they have over the world. Mm-hmm. And so that research is a little bit controversial. There's been some other research sort of calling it into question, but it's pretty well established that people who are more optimistic believe that they have more control over the events in their lives, mm-hmm. which suggests that it's healthy to have some level of overconfidence.
And in the book, you talk about your own use of antidepressants and the fact that embarking on this book project, as I recall, allowed you to get off the antidepressants. Is that right?
Yes. So that was having this big project, this big goal. I've always found that when I'm busy, I'm less depressed. So part of it was just being super busy. This was taking up my whole life. And then also just having this big meaningful project to work on. Mm-hmm. So I was able to go 6 months without taking antidepressants, which was a long time for me.
Okay, and how does that tie into the thesis of the book? I mean, what was that? That wasn't a form. Was that something like a form of magical thinking, or what? What's the connection?
So I brought that up in the epilogue where mm-hmm. I talked about treating the world as sacred, mm-hmm. Which is sort of on the fringes of magical thinking. And so one way to treat the world as sacred is to, basically I talk about sacredness as, if you see something as sacred, it means that it's making you feel like you are in the presence of something larger than yourself, which is kind of an abstract definition, but sacredness is a hard thing to really pin down. So one form of sacredness is treating goals as sacred. So basically seeing your actions or the events in your life as some part of some larger narrative. And so, it's debatable whether you want to call that a sense of sacredness, but feeling like your actions are contributing to something larger than yourself. It definitely provides a sense of comfort and a sense of meaning in life. Right.
Now, in the extreme case, I guess the kind of religious case, the idea would be that you're performing your mission in life, right? There's this thing you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to do it because it will lead to the good. But you're saying there's a kind of a secular version of that doesn't involve thinking that there's been a purpose imparted to you by some supernatural being, but still has some of the effects.
Right. So you don't have to see your life as purposeful in terms of the purpose of a supernatural entity who is giving your life purpose. Mm-hmm. You can sort of find your own purpose in life, and inject meaning that way.
And believe that I assume belief that you're doing good helps.
I would assume for most people it would. Yeah.
And this idea of sacredness, it cuts across a number of these laws, right? A number of these tendencies help impart a sense of sacredness to the world. I mean, the one we started out with, where, say, my father's wartime memorabilia, it's very evident how I view those things as sacred, and so those are meaningful things that I own. But there are other of these laws that, in a sense, enrich your sense of the sacred, right?
Yeah. So, for instance, the medals, you're treating the medals as sacred in some respect, and that they're not just hunks of metal. They're not just collections of atoms. They are part of something larger. They're part of your family history. They're part of the connections and the feelings you have toward other people. And then things like superstitious rituals. It's not just knocking on wood. It's not just putting your hand against a tree product. It's has these larger implications. It's part of some sort of communication or connection with the universe regarding luck. So a lot of these things are, whether it's an object or whether it's an act, they can be regarded as sacred in that way.
Mm-hmm. By the way, one thing I'm wondering which, if any, law the following falls under. I've asked a number of times, I've been speaking to groups of people, and I've asked them the following thing about like omens, okay? Mm-hmm. I've said, have you ever faced a really important decision? You're deciding whether to marry somebody, whether to accept a job, what university to go to, whether to have an extramarital affair, whatever, some big decision, mm-hmm. and you're like caught up in the pondering of it, and then you like see some billboard that has a word that seems relevant, or some song comes on that just seems uncannily relevant, and it just really gets your attention in a deep, and you take seriously the possibility that it is going to provide the key guidance. And when I ask that question, I would say invariably more than 95% of the people say yes. I mean, whether or not they wind up accepting the guidance, they go, whoa. And now we haven't mentioned that so far. Does that fall into any of these categories?
That would be chapter 7. That would be destiny, or feeling like certain things are meant to happen. Like this billboard or whatever was meant to be there as a sign to you, to direct your behavior. So a lot of magical thinking comes from pattern recognition, or noticing coincidences, particularly seeing patterns between your own thoughts and things in the world. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, mind over matter is you're seeing a connection between your own intentions, your own thoughts, and then something that happens outside of you later. And feeling like something was meant to happen, you're noticing a connection between this event and some personal meaning, and thinking, well, maybe this event that led to this, meaningful change in my life, could that just be a coincidence that it would be such a meaningful event for me, or was it put there intentionally? Mm-hmm. What are the chances? And so, seeing an omen or seeing a sign, you're thinking, wow, this speaks directly to me. This is just what I was thinking about. And this has such meaning for me. What are the chances that it would just end up there? Perhaps it was intentionally put there.
Okay. And finally, you might think that people who believe in an afterlife generally are attributing more meaning to the whole experience, but it turns out that reminding people that they're going to die, I mean, even if they don't believe in an afterlife, mm-hmm. actually enhances the meaning of their lives. Is that right?
Yeah, it can. It can make people realize that life is precious, that you're not going to be here forever. Mm-hmm. You just have this finite amount of time, and you should make the best use of it.
Mm-hmm. And, coincidentally, we have a finite amount of time. So we're going to bring this to an end. But thanks so much, Matt. Fascinating book, 7 Laws of Magical Thinking. And the contention is that we are all a little less rational than we think, and that it's often not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Well, thanks for your tough questions.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you considered them tough. I hope you didn't consider them unfairly tough.
No.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and good luck with the book.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. See you.